San Jose, California, 525 South Winchester Boulevard, a place that looks like it was built to impress the living and confuse the dead. The morning is likely warm and dry, the kind of late summer air that turns dust into a fine, invisible powder. It's reportedly just before sunrise on September 5, 1922. Stand here with me at the edge of the property. Imagine the smell, sun-baked wood, faint garden soil, the ghost of smoke that never fully leaves old chimneys. Listen, the distant hush of early traffic, a bird testing its first note, and inside the mansion, nothing. Not even the comforting rhythm of work. Because for decades, the sound of building was the heartbeat of this house. Hammer, saw, footsteps, orders murmured in hallways. Then, silence. Inside, on this very day, Sarah Lockwood Purdie Winchester dies. And the longest home renovation in America, maybe in the modern imagination, the strangest, stops with her final breath. Construction ceases on September 5, 1922, and less than a year later, the doors open to the public on June 30, 1923. Now step forward. Your shoes meet the porch with a dull thud. The wood is slightly springy, warmed by yesterday's sun and cooled by the night. When the front door yields, the air changes, cooler, older. The scent becomes varnish and aged timber, like an attic that learned to masquerade as a palace. And what you see, at first, looks perfect, ornate, Victorian, a masterpiece in motion. But look closer. This mansion is a contradiction with a chandelier. It contains 160 rooms, 2,000 doors, 10,000 windows, 47 stairways, 47 fireplaces, 52 skylights, 17 chimneys, 13 bathrooms, and 6 kitchens, and yet it cannot offer the one thing a grieving human being actually needs, a straight path forward. The official site calls it 24,000 square feet, a sprawling mansion grown from an 8-room farmhouse, built at an estimated $5 million, noted as $1,923, presented as $71 million today. Here is your first shock, your first reveal of money versus reality. A fortune can buy 10,000 panes of glass, but it cannot buy one unbroken morning. And it is on this quiet morning, Sarah gone, workers dismissed, plans left unfinished, that the mansion's truth begins to leak out from behind its lace-like trim. It was never a finished dream. It was a coping mechanism you can walk through. But the story doesn't begin here, in California, in a maze built from grief and wealth. It begins 2,500 miles away, where the air is damp, the streets are narrower, and the rules for women are written in ink that expects obedience. New Haven, Connecticut, June 4, 1839. Sarah is born into a world where a proper girl can learn music, languages, manners, anything, as long as it does not resemble power. The house she grows up in is orderly, predictable, the kind of place where windows open where they should, and stairs lead to rooms you actually need. She will spend the rest of her life rewriting that logic. At 23, she marries William Wirt Winchester on September 30, 1862. In your mind's eye, see the wedding. The soft scrape of shoes on polished floors, the scent of flowers and candle wax, the subtle weight of Victorian expectation pressing down like a velvet curtain. William is heir to the Winchester repeating arms fortune. The name itself hums with American ambition, industry, expansion, the West. But remember this, because fate loves irony. Money enters Sarah's life the way storms enter the sea. Quietly at first, then all at once. 4 years later, June 15th, 1866, Sarah gives birth to a daughter, Annie Pardee Winchester. Imagine the nursery, the scent of warm milk, soft cotton, the tiny squeak of a rocking chair. Imagine Sarah's fingers tracing her baby's hand, the skin so delicate it feels like a promise. And then, within a month, Annie dies. The sources describe illness. The word marasmus appears in the historical record. But no word can adequately translate what it does to a mother when the future disappears in the span of 4 weeks. This is what tragedy does. It teaches you that life is not built on logic. It's built on collapse. For years after Annie's death, Sarah continues living in the architecture of normalcy. Dinners, social rules, the slow passage of seasons. while something inside her remains permanently under construction. Then comes the second blow. In March 1881, William dies of tuberculosis. The National Park Service gives a specific date, March 7th, 1881, and in either case, the outcome is the same. The last person who truly shared Sarah's private grief is gone. Now pause here, because most stories would frame this as the beginning of a ghost tale. But a better story, truer, sadder, is about what happens when private grief meets public wealth. Sarah becomes extraordinarily rich. How rich? The documented details are complex, but her control of Winchester repeating arms stock and dividends is real enough to trace. According to Wikipedia's summary of financial records, after her husband's death, she controlled 777 shares valued at $77,700 at the time. Dividends averaged $7,900 annually between 1880 and 1885. In 1898, after her mother-in-law's death, she inherited 2,000 more shares worth about $400 per share. Between 1910 and 1912, she received $260,000 each year in stock dividends. By 1919, the company's troubles reduced stock value from about $10 million to around $3.75 million. And then there's the popular figure, often repeated in modern retellings, of a $20 million inheritance, 50 ownership, and $1,000 per day income. The SF Gate piece notes these claims, but emphasizes how myth and rumor grew around her. So we will treat the bigger, cleaner numbers as reportedly, not gospel. Here is the philosophical truth. Money magnifies whatever you already are. If you are joyful, it buys celebrations. If you are grieving, it buys elaborate silence. But Sarah's grief is not the quiet kind. It is restless. It needs movement. It needs revision, demolition, rebuilding, the way a mind circles the same memory again and again, hoping the angle changes the pain. A physician recommends a drier, warmer climate, in part because Sarah's rheumatoid arthritis is worsening. She decides to go west. And this is where we enter the orchard. San Jose, late 1880s. Acres of fruit trees, fields that roll like a green ocean under the California sun. Smithsonian describes trying to imagine the space as Sarah first saw it. An unassuming cottage surrounded by orchards, long before freeways boxed it in. In 1886, the Winchester Mystery House timeline says Sarah purchases a 2-story farmhouse near San Jose, begins remodeling, and the building that will be called Lanata Villa begins its transformation. Now, this is important. There is a discrepancy across sources. The NPS text says construction began in 1884. The official house timeline and facts page emphasize the remodel from 1886 onward, continuing until her death in 1922. We can't pretend these dates don't conflict, so we name the conflict and keep the arc. Mid-1880s and in 1922, the house grows for decades. And what happens next is where the mansion starts to look perfect from the outside and starts to reveal its truth from the inside. At first, it's just expansion. A new room. A corridor. A staircase. A carpenter's saw chews through wood, fresh pine scent in the air, sawdust coating boots. Nails are tapped in with the steady rhythm of somebody paid to build what someone else can't name. Lantern light flickers on ornate trim. Somewhere, Sarah's presence is felt more than heard. But then the additions multiply. Plans change. Walls shift. According to SF Gate, Sarah eventually parts ways with architects and begins drawing plans herself. And a surviving letter shows her describing practical problems, like an addition making a hall too dark, causing people to miss their footing on the stairs. That doesn't read like madness. It reads like a person with an endless budget and the freedom to treat architecture like an evolving draft. And what happens next is where the mansion starts to look perfect from the outside and starts to reveal its truth from the inside. At first, it's just expansion. A new room. A corridor. A staircase. A carpenter's saw chews through wood, fresh pine scent in the air, sawdust coating boots. Nails are tapped in with the steady rhythm of somebody paid to build what someone else can't name. Lantern light flickers on ornate trim. Somewhere, Sarah's presence is felt more than heard. But then the additions multiply. Plans change. Walls shift. According to SF Gate, Sarah eventually parts ways with architects and begins drawing plans herself, and a surviving letter shows her describing practical problems, like an addition making a hall too dark, causing people to miss their footing on the stairs. That doesn't read like madness. It reads like a person with an endless budget and the freedom to treat architecture like an evolving draft. Still, the public watches from a distance. A reclusive widow, constant construction, money spent where others see no purpose. And the 1890s are not a gentle decade. SF Gate describes how, after the Depression of 1893, unemployment soared, and Sarah became an easy target, a gaudy reminder of the haves versus the have-nots. The mansion becomes less a home and more a symbol people project their anger on. Here's a question that should haunt you more than any ghost story. If you cannot understand a person, do you try to learn them, or do you invent them? By 1895, a newspaper article claims the sound of the hammer is never hushed, and suggests a belief that finishing the house would mean Sarah's death. It's an early seed of the myth, long before the modern ghost revenge storyline becomes popular. Little did the readers know how cleanly that rumor would later fit the ending. When Sarah dies in 1922, the work stops. Now step back inside the mansion with me, into the years when it reaches its peak. The exterior is Victorian, quaint, and influences ornate details, multiple gables. But the inside is its own country. The official site lists the house's facts, and those numbers, 160 rooms, 2,000 doors, 10,000 windows, aren't decoration. They're a kind of language. If you want to understand Sarah, you don't start with a seance. You start with a floor plan that refuses to be solved. Imagine walking through a corridor lined with windows, light fractured by stained glass, dust hanging in the air like slow snow. Your footsteps echo and then die in corners you didn't expect. The house is alive in the way a forest is alive. It doesn't care that you want a straight line. Now, room by room, let's tour the mansion as a psychological portrait, not a haunted attraction. First, the grand exterior approach. Outside, the woodwork is elaborate, almost lace-like. In the morning, the house throws sharp shadows, spires and trim cutting triangles across the lawn. You can smell fresh-cut grass mixed with older wood, and hear birds nesting near eaves. It is, on its face, the American dream, a private kingdom. But kingdoms need logic. Inside, logic is optional. Second, the entry and main corridors. The main corridors are long enough to make you aware of your own breathing. You feel the air temperature shift from room to room. Cool pockets under skylights, warmer corners near fireplaces. The sound of your coat brushing fabric becomes loud because the house is built to amplify solitude. Sarah's personality, by many accounts reserved, fits these spaces, not empty, but controlled. SF Gate notes she preferred a quiet life, and that absence of her voice allowed gossip to grow. Third, the staircases. There are 47 stairways according to the house's own facts, and you don't even need all of them to understand what this means. A staircase is supposed to take you somewhere. Here, sometimes it doesn't. One staircase climbs, and then meets a ceiling. Another turns too tightly, like a thought that cannot finish itself. You run your hand along the railing. The wood is smooth, worn by countless touches. Guides, guests, workers, maybe Sarah herself in earlier years. It feels like a sentence that's been repeated so many times the edges are softened. If a mind were a house, Smithsonian argues, it might look like this: revision, suppression, creation, all happening in wood rather than in thought. Fourth, the door to nowhere. You open a door and face a wall, or worse, open on empty air. This is the image the world remembers. But Wikipedia notes that some anomalies are tied to later changes and the 1906 earthquake damage. Symbolically, though, a door to nowhere is grief. It's the attempt to return to a life that no longer exists. Fifth, the stained glass. Stained glass is where the mansion becomes tender. Light filters through colored panes and paints the floor in shifting mosaics. You can smell the faint mineral note of old glass and the woody sweetness of varnish. This spiderweb design, beautiful, precise, catches sunlight like a trap catches morning dew. Money can buy beauty, but beauty can also be armor. Sixth, the fireplaces and chimneys. There are 47 fireplaces and 17 chimneys listed in the house's own figures. Fireplaces suggest gathering, warmth, conversation. But in a home famous for solitude, fireplaces become more like props. Warmth without community, flame without family. Seventh, the skylights. 52 skylights. Think about that number. Skylights are windows aimed at the heavens. They are literal openings to the sky. For a woman surrounded by death, child, husband, skylights can feel like a confession. I want light. I want proof there is something above this. Now, here comes the moment when the mansion, at its peak, meets the greatest crack in its foundation. 1906, the Great San Francisco earthquake tears through Northern California. The earth moves with a violence so indifferent it feels personal. Picture it. A low rumble like a freight train inside the ground. Glass rattling. Furniture skittering. The smell of dust and plaster. People shouting names into collapsing streets. We have photographs from San Francisco. Ruined streets, devastated buildings, the city laid open like a wound. At the mansion, Wikipedia notes severe damage. The 7-story tower collapses, chimneys fall, additions are destroyed. The Winchester timeline states the earthquake damages the mansion and that the 7-story tower and much of the 4th floor are later demolished. Here is the cruel joke fate plays. Sarah builds endlessly to fight unpredictability. Then the earth reminds her that unpredictability is the only honest architect. After the quake, the house's weirdness becomes easier to mythologize. Damaged wings, altered staircases, doors that no longer make sense because what they once connected to is gone. And yet, building continues. The story people love is that she builds to confuse ghosts. But the story you can feel in your bones is simpler. She builds because stopping would mean sitting still with what happened to Annie, with what happened to William, with what time did to her body. And as years pass, the mansion becomes less a home and more a world, complete with its own rules, its own shortcuts, its own dead ends. By the time Sarah is older, the house contains numbers so large they sound unreal. 160 rooms, 40 bedrooms, 47 staircases, 13 bathrooms, 6 kitchens, 10,000 window panes, 2,000 doors, plus details like 3 elevators, 2 basements, and just 1 shower, according to the house's own itinerary page. Just 1 shower. In a mansion built like a dream. That's the kind of detail that makes you stop and ask, was this a palace or an experiment? Now we approach the final act. Not with a villain, not with a hero, but with an aging woman whose life has been turned into folklore. Sarah dies at the house on September 5th, 1922, and immediately the story changes hands. S.F. Gate describes how, in life, her death made barely a ripple, but after her death, the mansion becomes a product. Stories grow sharper, more supernatural. A seance room is framed as proof. Even though S.F. Gate notes there are no contemporary accounts of seances, and some researchers argue that so-called seance room may have been something else. In other words, after Sarah's voice disappears, the world speaks louder over her. And yet primary source material exists. Paper trails, legal files, daybooks, held in archives. History San Jose notes that Samuel Leib, Sarah's legal consultant, left behind correspondence, property records, bank statements, receipts, and even letters. And the Hansen collection includes daybooks from the ranch foreman's family documenting activity and Mrs. Winchester's comings and goings. This matters because it pulls Sarah back into the human world. A woman who pays taxes, discusses wills, transfers property, manages investments. This is not a cartoon ghost bride. This is a person. And people are always more complicated than the myths we sell about them. Now, return with me to the opening morning again, but with all of this context loaded into your chest like a second heartbeat. San Jose, 525 South Winchester Boulevard. The house stands. The rooms are still there. The doors still open. The windows still catch the light like 1,000 small eyes. But Sarah is gone. The construction that once seemed like madness now looks like a language she invented because ordinary language failed her. And here's the final philosophical turn. Maybe the mansion looked perfect from far away, like wealth, like power, like control, until the truth came out, until you stepped inside and realized it was built on grief, layered, revised, remodeled, until the only straight line left was death. If you want a haunting last image, don't imagine ghosts. Imagine a hammer placed down for the last time. Imagine the dust settling on plans that will never be finished. Imagine sunlight entering through 52 skylights and illuminating nothing but absence. And hear this as the final echo of the opening. Money can buy marble, glass, and rooms without end. But it cannot buy one more day with the people you love.